Welcome back to our thought for the day. Just last week, my wife and I went for a walk around town and the sun was out, it was quiet, hardly any cars on the road, and just for a briefest of moments, I found myself thinking, how lovely is this? It felt to me like a lazy Sunday afternoon, or maybe a sort of a bank holiday Monday when everyone's gone off for a day out and you're the ones that have stayed around town. And just sometimes over the last 2 weeks, I've almost forgotten what's going on and found myself just thinking, isn't this lovely? But of course, then you see the masks on people's faces, you see the gloves on people's hands, you see the shops that are shut, you see the social distancing measures, the boxes we stand in, the lines we're not allowed to cross. And it all gets very serious. And of course, then my wife and I went for a walk and we walked down a thin country lane and someone came towards us and they almost jumped into the bush next to the path to get out of our way. We've limited human contact to make sure this contagious virus doesn't spread. I had a funny situation the other day. I was in a local shop and as I put my hand out to receive the change, the shopkeeper put the change in my hand and briefly his fingers just touched the palm of my hand. And there was that moment of utter horror between both of us as we looked into each other's eyes and both realised we'd done what we weren't supposed to do. And there was a sense of real panic as I'm sure we rushed off to scrub our hands in our respective homes and the shop he was in. But it made me think actually this lack of social interaction has reminded me of a story about Jesus and a man with a skin disease that's found in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verse 40. And in this story, Jesus comes into contact with a man who has a contagious, infectious skin disease. Often the translation in our Bibles is leprosy or leper, but actually really it's just any contagious skin disease. And I'd like just to read a few verses to you. It says, a man with leprosy or a skin condition came to him, that being Jesus, and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. What you may or may not realise about life in the first century is that if you had one of these infectious skin disease, you were considered ill, you were considered contagious, you were considered what's called ceremonially unclean. That meant that you weren't able to go to the temple to worship God, you weren't able to interact with people, you couldn't get married, you couldn't have a job. You had to separate yourself, isolate yourself off from all of your community. In fact, when people with these skin diseases would come down the road, they would have to shout at the top of their voice, unclean, so people knew to get out of the way. My wife and I lived in Bangladesh a few years ago and people with leprosy would come down our street and they would ring a bell so people knew they would come, and it is the most tragic thing to see. And so in Jesus' culture, if someone came with one of these skin diseases, no one would go near them, no one would reach out their hand and touch them, except that is God's Son, Jesus the Christ. In this story, this leper says, please will you make me clean if you're willing. And I love that Jesus is indignant because of course he's willing. But Jesus does something before he heals this man. He reaches out his hand and he touches him. I think for this man, this would have been the most incredible moment because up until this point, he has been contagiously dirty, contagiously ill. And yet Jesus is unafraid to touch him because you see, Jesus is contagiously clean. And he is unafraid of this man's condition. In fact, Jesus is powerful enough to clean him and heal him and restore him in society. And when I ponder this, I'm not suggesting that we disobey the social distancing rules, quite the opposite. We must keep those in their entirety. But this story reminds us of something spiritual, something important for every single human being to know. We may not have infectious skin diseases, but many of us carry around bagfuls of shame and guilt. A lot of us have had things that happened to us or done by us, and we carry that sense of inner dirt, if you like, inner sadness, inner shame. And we feel that we need to separate ourselves off from loved ones and family and friends. Maybe we worry that we are going to be the bad influence on people. And maybe we often feel that we are unlovable, that a God who is perfect couldn't possibly love someone as bad as I. And yet in this story, God's one and only Son, who became a perfect human being, who had done no wrong, is unafraid to reach out and touch a man who is infectious and dirty and an outcast. And this afternoon, I want you to know that no matter how bad you feel about yourself, how rubbish you may feel, how much baggage you carry, Jesus reaches out his hand to you. He loves you so much that he gave his life on the cross to take away that baggage. He is contagiously clean, and he wants to cleanse you on the inside. All you need to do is to ask Jesus Christ into your life, and he will do the rest. God bless you, and we'll see you tomorrow.